It's been more than a year since David Wald voluntarily announced his termination with Crunchyroll. Ever since they and Sony absorbed Funimation, more controversies like this have started to spike, and if these are the kinds of things that happen when you have a monopoly trying to get their hands on everything, then I'm not too surprised. But at the same time, it makes me feel regret for being okay with this rebrand, or merger, or whatever you want to call it. Meanwhile, another thing that really bothers me, because it has nothing to do with David's mail theft accusations, are those who bring up a certain lawsuit in 2019. Vic Mignogna and his defamation case. When you click on certain YouTube videos addressing David's complaints and termination, made by Chibi Reviews, Otaku Spirit, or me, you might find comments saying things like, well, that doesn't surprise me after what they did to poor Vic, or justice for Vic. So, people, like the second comment here, believe that when David Wald exposes Crunchyroll's far too numerous abuses, somehow that's automatically going to give their hero his non-existent justice. Now listen, I myself don't like Sony, nor do I like Crunchyroll, but here's the difference. I don't like them for way more important reasons than I stand with Vic's devotion for Vic Mignogna himself, and this is one of the reasons I don't like this hashtag. There are much bigger issues within the anime industry and the economy than removing one guy that at least half the community doesn't like. Crunchyroll has done a lot of damaging things to their voice actors, translators, and other workers. They're all being treated poorly by a greedy corporation. We all know that, and so does I Stand With Vic. We just don't like that for different reasons. The reason I Stand With Vic doesn't like Crunchyroll or them treating their workers badly is because their former competitor Funimation, whom they absorbed, got rid of Vic for bad behavior, and that was the right thing to do. I, on the other hand, dislike them because they became a global monopoly in 2022. It's literally been 4 years since this announcement, and things have only gotten worse. They've been trying to get their hands on every product they possibly can and treat their workers as just tools, as backed up by Alexis Tipton. They don't even have Christmas parties or get free copies of their work. Believe it or not, I've told a couple of my friends who are big anime fans about these. They were caught off guard, and they admitted they considered canceling their Crunchyroll subscriptions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't know why people are still of the belief that Vic was genuinely backstabbed when there's no proof. The only source Vic stans are getting that from is Vic outside of court, claiming it like, dude, trust me.
When you aspire to a certain level in any field, you automatically subject yourself to ridicule, jealousy, professional jealousy, and people that just there are people out there, Peter, believe it or not, that just can't stand to see other people succeed. Sure, you're going to get a lot of this, right? You're going to get a lot of, man, what a great job. I love your series. And you're also going to get people who try to slander and, you know what I mean, and backbite and backstab and cause trouble.
This is contrary to what he already admitted inside the court. The crude jelly bean joke with Monica.
She said, do you recall being at an event with Monica, at a convention event, and eating a jelly bean that she had signed and saying, now I can't, well, Monica said, why would you eat that? You know, you're going to get ink poisoning. And I, off the cuff, made a joke that, well, now I can say I ate Monica Real.
Pulling Jamie's hair, balling his hand up into a fist and shaking it a bit to show how he did it, pulling his other co-workers by their hair, some of the hotel room stuff with Kara. In the IO9 article, he admitted he rubbed Kara's legs and tried to argue that it was consensual, but she testified otherwise, pressuring his fans like two twin sisters into sleeping with him.
My recollection was that I had seen these these two ladies at multiple conventions, and I was under the very clear impression that they were interested or attracted to me. And they were very kind, attractive, friendly young ladies. And so after the fourth or fifth time that I saw them at an event, one night or one day, I don't remember when, I asked them if they wanted to come to my room. I invited them to my room. They came voluntarily. I let them in. One of them sat on the bed. The other one sat in a chair in the room, and I sat in another chair in the room. We made some small talk, and then they asked me why I invited them to my room. And I said, well, I was under the impression that there was a lot of mutual attraction going on here, and I thought maybe you might be interested in some kind of a sexual interaction. They told me they were not. I said, okay, and they left.
And when you read their affidavits from their perspective, it gets more disturbing. Vic asked them to do a striptease for him, and when he asked if that made them uncomfortable, they said yes because he was around his 50s, which is about the same age as their father, while they were in their early 20s. Then Vic immediately began throwing a tantrum about, oh, age is just a number. That's a common defense he uses when people voice that concern, by the way.
Age is a number. For me personally, I would not dismiss anybody based on merely the number of years they've been around. It means nothing.
Anyway, Vic scared the twins, made them cry, and forcibly kissed them before they left. He admitted to kissing a subtitle editor under Funimation property. He admitted he hired prostitutes, cheating on his fiancée, and yelling at staffers.
Organizers at conventions, meanwhile, shared stories of unprofessional behavior, such as overstaying his panel time and yelling at staffers. Any truth to that?
Occasionally.
These are things that Vic admits in a court of law under oath. He tried to argue that he had different intent for doing them, or remembered them differently, but otherwise testified he did the inappropriate things he was accused of. See, I know I've said this before, but when you file a lawsuit for defamation, it's not about, oh, you misunderstood what I meant, or, yes, they're telling the truth about this part of the story, but they're lying about this part of the story. No. What you're saying is, these accusers are lying about you, and you never did those things in the first place. Ever. The lawyers and judge don't care about what he intended, or how much of them he remembers, because they're only looking for facts. So he, outside of court, claims it was all just an attempt to backstab him. They hate him because he was a Christian. Every accuser is just jealous of him or doesn't understand why people are telling these stories, depending on what video you watch or article you read. But when you put that next to all the things he confessed inside of court, I don't know. Sure sounds like Vic is lying to me. But with David Wald's mail theft accusations, this is different. You can't compare it to the Vic Mignogna drama because his behavior was always inappropriate, and it dates back even further than 2019, i.e. the 1989 story with Robin Michelle Blankenship McConnell. Unlike many emotionally driven Vic stans, who do compare these anyway, when David Wald specified it was during both the independent Funimation era and post-Monopoly with Crunchyroll, I chose to pause and ask myself these questions. Was it literally Funimation who stole any of his fan mail, or was it actually Sony management? Or is David Wald misremembering how many years it was? Because the time in October of 2024 was the first time he made this announcement. Because the rebranding Monopoly began to happen in late 2021, while it was officially announced in 2022, I assumed it was actually 3 years. But if it really was part of the late independent Funimation era in 2019, then we can't just assume they wanted to throw away his mail or give it to employees for free, and that they're automatically evil just because they got rid of Vic. I mean, it's not just because his case is incomparable, but also the timeline of what happened during that era. It is a lot more complicated than what many emotionally driven Vic stans think with their bias. We need to think about how the government ran during the late Funimation era. Part of these 5 years were during the coronavirus pandemic, which means all offices in all workplaces had to shut down or run with skeleton crews, including Funimation. That was when they were adapting with remote recording too. If fans have been sending letters and gifts to David during COVID-19, and Funimation had closed for a while, then they probably couldn't give it to him for safety reasons. When you think about it, for them, it doesn't sound like the intentional mail theft as it ultimately came to be with Crunchyroll, but rather, mail delay. Granted, mail delay may have its own consequences, but again, because one infected with COVID can easily spread it to another with any form of contact, you have to have some understanding that Funimation couldn't have David's fan mail delivered to him right away. Also, mail delay is not as serious as mail theft. Of course, this is a possibility, and we won't know the rest of the context until David finally live streams and reveals what he's been through. So even if any part of Funimation did dispose any of his fan mail, we can't just blame it on the Funimation company as a whole. The issue could be more likely with the mailroom clerks. Either they weren't doing their job properly, or there was some form of mismanagement. The point is, even now that Crunchyroll absorbed Funimation, and if both had some responsibility for Wald not getting his fan mail, you cannot compare this to the Vic drama. I'm not saying you're not allowed to still like his work as Edward Elric or Tamaki Suo. I just want to make sure that people are aware that David exposing their numerous abuses won't necessarily do justice for Vic. The only way he would get that is to win the lawsuit he started in 2019. But he lost, not just because he admitted what he was accused of, but also because he hired the wrong lawyer he needed for his case. You've probably heard this before, but Ty Beard is not a defamation lawyer. He's an estate lawyer. Like, try to imagine you have a lipoma in your arm. You want to get it removed, and you ask a dentist to remove it for you. Here's the problem, though. A dentist cannot remove a lipoma because their job is to clean your teeth. What you need is a lipoma surgeon to get it removed. So while a dentist and a surgeon are doctors, they have different qualifications. In order for Vic to win his defamation lawsuit, he needs a defamation lawyer to help him. The reason Vic went with Ty Beard is because Nick Rekieta recommended him to Vic. See, from what I've heard, Rekieta apparently has family members in Texas, and so Ty Beard apparently handles those estates for him.
So why the fuck did Vic Mignogna end up with estate lawyer Ty Beard? Wow, could it possibly be because Ty Beard was Nick Rekieta's family's estate lawyer? Because he was! Nick had family in Texas. Nick is a trust fund kid. Ty Beard handles all that shit for him. And sure, there's nothing like illegal about recommending any lawyer you want to a guy, but you want to recommend a guy who doesn't even practice the kind of law you need? Really? Why would you do that?
So it seemed less about helping Vic clear his name and more about making money for themselves, which brings us to the third reason why he lost. Vic and his legal team didn't take the anti-slap move seriously. First, Vic had no evidence that everyone defamed him. The only reason he took Funimation to court is because he was mad that they announced they no longer wanted to work with him. It's not, I have evidence these people defamed me, it's, how do I make Funimation suffer as much as possible to get my revenge on them? In other words, the term SLAP is an acronym for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. This is when a plaintiff files a lawsuit in an attempt to retaliate against the people they're suing. Generally, a plaintiff doesn't expect to win cases like this, but to humiliate the defendants, tire them out, and make them surrender. In this case, that means encouraging harassment against Vic Mignogna's victims.
I'm asking them for help. Make these people miserable, please. I would consider it a personal favor.
But for Monica, Jamie, and Funimation, because they were all in Texas, they're protected by the anti-SLAP movement called the TCPA, or Texas Citizens Participation Act. It's a move that dismisses frivolous lawsuits, and in this case, Vic was held liable to pay legal fees to the people he was suing. So Vic didn't care about clearing his name. What he cared about was punishing the people he holds a grudge against because they don't want to be friends with him or work with him anymore. He can no longer have what he wants or get his way because he wouldn't keep his hands and lips to himself. So he took them to court in the hopes of making the people he's mad at suffer because his ego is too big and fragile for him to handle rejection, lost because he didn't take the TCPA seriously and had no proof everyone defamed him, and so he was forced to pay Monica, Ron, and Jamie almost $500,000. This is why I say that David Wald exposing Crunchyroll's abuses will not help get Vic Mignogna justice. If anything, David's doing this for his co-workers and himself. And if he files his own lawsuit, has enough evidence, and a good chance of winning, David can get his own justice from that. In the end, I stand with Vic. Hyping up for false justice through David's exposure is only more proof of how obvious the evidence around his misconducts are.